Good afternoon. This is Debra V. Wilson. I am in West Yorkshire. It is Friday, the 18th of January, 2019. The time is 1300 hours and 16 minutes. 16 minutes, and that's GMT. The title of this podcast is The Thirst to Be Heard. I think it's important in this very challenging time with Brexit for all of us to own and acknowledge the position from which we emerge and to understand the spaces in which we occupy and how we act and engage from those spaces and how we're seen from those spaces. So I'm thinking about the disruptions that occurred earlier this month with some persons and some politicians and some journalists. And actually, I'm going to speak from the perspective of persons who might align themselves with the political narratives of being perhaps right of center. I think in my politics would be left of center, as I've been, I hope, transparent about that. So, when I first started my activism here, I came as an American, right? And I'm an American who is also African American, so I know a bit about social hierarchies. But the interesting thing, when I first started coming to the United Kingdom, which was in the 80s, people saw me as an American first. And that was confusing for me, as well as the class system here was confusing, because I'm embarrassed to say, coming from Chicago, I saw people in terms of their, what you call race, but I call ethnicity. So I saw white people, and then I saw black people. And so I didn't understand the cultural, the class system here and the class nuances. And because Americans have, at that time, a particular unique way in which they were placed on that class system, I didn't experience the racism of that Afro-Caribbeans and Africans did, who are British. I didn't experience it because people identified me as an American who happened to be black. That was, like I said, 30 years ago. I had a lot of growing up to do in terms of understanding this country. The more I came here, I got offended. People offended me with my lack of understanding. But one thing that developed from that is that I think I now I do a better job, I think, of looking at a situation and trying to understand all the dynamics. So with that, again, I'm going to just, as a person who has been a civil society actor in this country for 30 years, and who positioned herself left of center, and then the community in which I based myself was out of the Russell Square community, the intelligentsia of the left. Okay? And I saw the ways in which those collective communities engaged, and it was primarily through academic means, analysis, research papers, conferences where people gave presentations. And one of the things that was always such a privilege for me and all of us is that we were heard. We were listened to. I attended meetings given by civil society inside Parliament. And occasionally politicians would come in. Currently sitting MPs would come in, and they would ask us what we thought about a topic. We had access. We had the privilege of access. And so I always think about activism, civil society, of being a part of the immune system of what is the human body, what is the body that is society, okay? So to further extrapolate on that point, then I would say civil society responds with the tools it has and how it understands what it is experiencing and seeing, okay? So the communities, the activists that I had the good fortune of working with and that I'm still connected to, they had access. We not only had access, we knew we had access. If someone wanted to discuss an issue, a concern, and they would say, well, let's see if we can get the MP from fill in the blanks. And sometimes someone from that, if not the MP themselves, someone from that office might show up. We had access. The tools we had was overwhelmingly, we were all very educated people. Great deal of formal education. We were all internationally traveling people. We were all connected in some way. So then I look at some of the activism that's emerging from people that are actually referred to as far right. Or white working class. For some people that's synonymous, which is for me problematic as an academic researcher. But nevertheless, I know some people make that conflation. White working class activism is, for some people, inherently far right, which is, again, unfortunate. But I look at some of the activism that is labeled far right, that has a great deal of physicality about it, that's loud, that's in your face, that's intrusive, and that can be quite frightening. And then I ask myself, I go back to look at the 30 years of the activism with the activists who traveled the globe, who had numerous degrees after their names, who have had and still have access here, and they know they have access here. And I think about the ways in which we collectively understood who we are, how we positioned in this society, even myself as a frequent visitor here, occasionally living here, but even myself for short periods of time living here, even myself understanding the position I had and the bag of skill sets I had, and so how I made meaning, assigned meaning to what I saw in this society and how I could possibly respond to it with the knowledge that someone was going to hear me. I was sure of it. Why? Because I had the privilege of access. And then I look at this activism that I find problematic, that I do, the getting in your face, the screaming, the very physical, the pushing, occasionally shoving, the name calling. And then I think, is it, I'm asking, because people believe, number one, they're not heard, so I'm going to make you hear me? Is it because they're actually not heard? Is it because they don't know they have access? Because this country offers a multitude of ways to reach out to your elected officials. Do people not believe that those systems exist? Or have they tried and not gotten a response? So you don't hear me, you being the state, you assign meaning to that, being that I'm invisible to you. You don't care, you don't listen. So I now need to get in your face and make myself heard. You will hear me, you will see me. I find such activism inappropriate. I think it can cause people, I don't care whether they're civilians, civil society actors, organized civil society actors, or the political sector, it causes people to withdraw and become concerned, and that's not good. It's not good ever, and that's the last thing we need now. We need to find ways to talk to each other. But one of the things that concerns me when I read the newspapers left of center and hear the intellectuals left of center, and it is the community in which I have found a home, is that in this situation, even though I find some behavior emerging from what is called right of center and appropriate, I think it's still important for those of us on the left who have privilege to remember that not only do we have privilege, we know we have it. My activism was around community safety. I was living in Chicago, and as much as I could afford it and my job allowed, I was professionally employed, I traveled to the UK. I dropped my luggage off at my hotel, or sometimes I was doing an extended stay at the long-term self-catering place I was renting. And I'd head off where? To Parliament to see what was going on and what meetings were available that were open to the public, or which organizations were engaging, because I knew I had a right to do that. And I'm not even a citizen of this country, but I knew I had the right to be expected, to be heard. I didn't feel, and I don't feel, and I've never felt that I didn't belong in Parliament. I came here, I spent money, I paid the VAT taxes, I paid money that went into this country. So I knew that I had a right to be heard. Me being here, I knew. I don't care if it was for a 3-night stay or if I stayed longer. I knew I was here. And there's some duty of care the state has to provide me because I'm here. So I never felt once that, oh, I shouldn't be here. Or why am I sitting here? I also realized in my expectations of the state that I had expectations. There were expectations of me and my behavior. I took my behavior very seriously here because, well, that's just the way I was raised by my parents, but also because I'm a visitor. But those expectations of behavior should extend to us all. Around this precarious narrative with great, tremendous political, sociological, and economic ramifications, there is Brexit. I think the cracks are showing in terms of our relationships with each other, but I also think that our humanity is showing. I think You have some personalities that just want to make trouble, but those are a statistical anomaly. I think most of the screaming is you want to be heard. And I think, although people won't, I believe my opinion, you want to be heard by people you have vested trust in, that you feel disappointed by. So you did trust them, or you still do, or you still have some expectation of them to care for you in their role as politicians. So in this period that we're going through, that I'm the first to admit is a challenging one, I think it's important for all of us to remember our responsibilities, each for the other. It's important to remember where we have privilege, and I'm speaking to those left of center who do have privilege and don't need to scream because they're already heard. And I would then speak to those people who feel unheard, not listened to. I think the screaming and the name calling, out of, in some cases, I think, is pain and seeking to connect. In the greatest irony, it actually pulls us further apart. And I think that's the last thing we need now. I think I think we have to find a way in this situation that is fraught with uncertainty, which isn't helping, but it's an inherent part of such change, no matter what happens with Brexit. You have a prime minister who is in real time navigating her understanding of her sense of duty. You have the public opining about how they're understanding and receiving her understanding, which is appropriate, that you are responding. I would just say screaming, threatening, menacing, it doesn't get us any closer to anything that's productive. It actually has the opposite effect. So, like I always do, I try to be as objective as possible. I try to be as dispassionate as possible. And I, as ever, am analytical. The analytical part, the objective, okay. Dispassionate is rather difficult. This is a country that I love. This is a country that I weep for, such as in times like this. And I wish I had the wisdom of our elders. But like everybody else, I'm wondering what's going to happen. But what I think I do understand, given that I have my own in-out existence, I'm an African American, so I know about being unheard. And I got on a plane as an American and flew just under 8 hours. And I was sitting with other civilians in your seat of democracy and power, and I was heard. So I do know the frustration of being unheard. And I do know the power of being heard. With that, because I always cry, I get quite emotional about this country. I don't think that's very academic, is it? But nevertheless, that's what I do. I would ask that the left those of us on the left with privilege, when we are being critical of those on the right, the far right, particularly when we deem far right, if the behavior is inappropriate, the behavior is inappropriate. I don't care if the person is left, right, center, what they are. But I would ask people to remember we are operating from a place of privilege. Those of us who have sat as private citizens in Parliament and had the privilege of being heard, we don't have to scream. This is Debra V. Wilson. I'm in West Yorkshire. Thank you for listening.